President Donald Trump has kept his promise of pardoning rioters of the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Yesterday, Trump granted clemency for nearly 1,600 people involved. That includes dozens of people around the Chicago area and Illinois. What's next, and what does this mean for civil society and political violence? Well, with us now to discuss is Professor Robert Pape, director of the Chicago Project on Security and Threats, or CPOST, at the University of Chicago. Hey, Professor, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
And Dan Mihalopoulos is here, WBEZ investigative reporter on government and politics. Hey, Dan.
Hey, Sasha.
So, Professor, before we get really into the nitty-gritty here, I want you to just clear up something for me. Clemency versus pardons, because we're hearing a lot of numbers being thrown around today about who got pardoned and when, and if you can just clarify the difference between the two so we understand going forward.
That's right. So the big bucket is clemency. And what Donald Trump has done is given clemency to every single person who's been charged with January 6 offenses. That includes pardons, that includes commutation of sentences, and that includes dismissals that have not reached the point of needing a pardon or a commutation. So that is everybody. There's not a group that has been held back.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. So, Dan, tell us, who did the president pardon? Because more than 140 police officers were injured that day, many with severe injuries, as we can remember. So do the pardons also include the rioters who are convicted of assaulting police?
Yeah, everybody from people who say that they just wandered in and didn't know that they weren't supposed to be there, which you have a bunch of people that say that, to people that we've seen on video evidence and who were tracked on their phones. Is the biggest federal investigation in the history of the DOJ.
Oh, for sure.
Department of Justice here is talking about, I think the number is roughly 1,800 in total. You hear these numbers, 1,500, which Trump used, and 1,600. These are people, many people whose cases have been adjudicated. You know, they were convicted, they were sentenced, and then they received pardons. Other people were in prison. They had their sentences commuted. This included leaders of such notorious far-right groups as the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, which played a central role in the riot, in the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. But we have a lot of people from, I've been covering this since basically January 6th, and the charges started within days, including people from Illinois. And so we followed these cases. There are a number of cases, a couple hundred, I guess, that are pending still. Those are also going to be vacated, and the Department of Justice under the new administration will not pursue those cases. So it's over.
So, Professor, you and your team, with that, you investigated every individual who was charged with offenses related to January 6th. What did you want to understand from that analysis?
We wanted to understand multiple things. The very first thing we wanted to know is how clear was it they were guilty? So we went through all of the court documents. That is, all the indictments, the sentencing documents. That's over 100,000 pages. And I think your listeners are going to be surprised to learn that those documents, person by person, are chock full of photographic evidence. That is, picture after picture after picture of the people who are charged with assaulting police, literally pounding police with their fists or with poles or with shields. Also, the people that are charged with misdemeanors, you might think, oh, that's like just being in the Capitol that day.
Right.
No. There are the misdemeanor charges are for people who were standing right next in the crowd to other individuals as close as Dan and I are to people that are being violent, literally within 3 feet.
Wow.
And so there is another group beyond the numbers you've just heard of 400 that the Department of Justice declined to prosecute at all. Those are the grandmas and the tourists that you see sometimes in those pictures. So I want to be very, very clear. These 1,600, and we have detailed reports, Sasha,
you break
on
down
our website.
You break down the ordinary
and your
Americans.
listeners can go to our website and they can see the pictures in our reports at our University of Chicago Project on Security and Threats websites for themselves. They don't have to take my word for it. And what I'm trying to say is all 1,600 of these individuals were deeply involved in the mob that was part of the riot. Those folks you hear, the grandmas, et cetera, those were 400 cases that the DOJ did not prosecute at all.
The folks who were there for the Day of Love, right?
Well, Donald Trump called it all a day of love.
So, Dan, what do we know about the people pardoned from Illinois?
Yeah, we know lots about them. They come from all over the state, from all walks of life. We've detailed their cases over the past 4 years as they've gone through the federal justice system. And there was a Chicago cop, a retired Chicago firefighter, a CEO from the northwest suburbs, and we can go on and on, all sorts of walks of life. Some people with affiliations with anti-government or extremist groups. Others that just drove out there, I guess, or so they say that was their motivation. And, they've had a lot of people championing them for years, pushing Trump. And there became this sort of idea of the violent versus the nonviolent, as Trump would say different things about what his intentions were should he get reelected, which obviously he was. Some of his supporters would say things like, well, I don't think that the violent offenders or those who attacked cops should be let go with a pardon. But this is what he did in the end.
I think it's interesting to hear people close to the president express that people who are violent shouldn't be pardoned. Here's a little bit of Vice President J.D. Vance on Fox News Sunday just last week.
I think it's very simple. Look, if you protested peacefully on January the 6th and you've had Merrick Garland's Department of Justice treat you like a gang member, you should be pardoned. If you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned. And there's a little bit of a gray area there, but we're very much committed to seeing the equal administration of law. And there are a lot of people, we think, in the wake of January the 6th who were prosecuted unfairly. We need to rectify that.
Now, even Trump's nominee for Attorney General, Pam Bondi, said this during last week's Senate Judiciary Committee's confirmation hearing.
I'm not going to speak for the president, but the president does not like people that abuse police officers either.
So then, Professor, are you surprised to see the president pardon people, particularly with these kinds of serious convictions?
Well, actually, I'm disappointed and stunned, but not surprised, because Donald Trump himself has gone back and forth between saying he was going to look case by case, and then by saying he was going to pardon virtually everybody. And what you saw is, in the end, as Dan said, all of these qualifications did not matter. And just to also clarify for the audience, these couple hundred people, it's 608 have been charged with assaulting police. Within that number, there's nearly 200 who are Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, and members of other militia groups who got very long sentences, in part because of what they did on January 6th, but in part because they pose an ongoing threat. And so this is something that is very important to understand. A lot of people are looking at this in the rear view mirror as what happened 4 years ago. What just happened in the last 24 hours is we have released from prison hundreds of people that our court system deemed as an ongoing threat, many of them members of Oath Keepers, Proud Boys militia groups whose purpose is violence. So this is like releasing people from gangs who were involved in gang-like activity and then saying, oh, there's nothing to see here. This is extremely concerning, not just about what it says in the past, but for the dangers going
for
forward
today and the future.
Today.
Yeah. If you're just tuning in, this is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. Does political violence have a place in America? We are digging into the January 6th pardons with Professor Robert Pape, who's the director of the Chicago Project on Security and Threats, or CPOST, at the U Chicago, and WBEZ investigative reporter on government and politics, Dan Mihalopoulos. So something from your analysis, Professor, that really stood out to me at the bottom here. You say, before the pardons, the question has been, was January 6th acceptable? And then you say after the pardons, the question will be, if January 6th is legitimate, what other levels of political violence will become acceptable in the future? Talk more about the message that we're sending here to American people.
We are already on the slippery slope of the normalization of political violence in our country. Just in the last few years, after January 6th, We saw assassination attempt against the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. Barack Obama, we arrested an assailant in front of his Washington, D.C. home who had guns and weapons in the assailant's vehicle. 2 Trump assassination attempts. Now we're releasing and legitimating January 6th itself. The president has used his power to legitimate a violation of the U.S. Constitution, and it was a violent violation of the U.S. Constitution.
Right.
This is unfortunately pushing us further down the road of legitimating political violence, and Donald Trump has listed out, many by name, his enemies. Now, Joe Biden pardoned those people. That does not protect those people from future political violence. Right. This is the world we're now in.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dan, you spoke to the lawyer of one former CPD officer at the riot about the pardons. He said it was, quote, the right thing to do. Here he is.
They made a mockery of Carl when all this happened. I mean, all he did was walk around the Capitol and go inside. He did nothing else. Didn't hurt anybody, didn't touch anybody, just walked around. And when he was told to leave by police officers, he left. But the Chicago Police Department wanted to make, an example of him. And, Lightfoot and the commander at the time, they did nothing but use him for political gain.
So who is this lawyer, and what does he mean by using him for political gain?
Yeah, that's Nishe Sen, who was representing Officer Carl Cheswick, who was convicted. I think he took his case all the way to trial and was convicted and sentenced. And the people that he's accusing of using him for political gain were the then mayor at the time, Lori Lightfoot, and the Chicago Police Department. And now Mr. Cheswick thinks that he should get his job back, that he should be reinstated as a cop. One of the things when you get a pardon is that certain rights are restored. He had lost his firearm owner's ID, his FOID card because of this. Now he thinks he can get it back. I think he probably can. And once he has that, he thinks that maybe the police union, whose leader on January 7th told this station that he didn't think there was anything wrong. He later backtracked from that. But this union is going to try to get him his job back. And so we've, in general, had a variety of people who I'm sure you've seen in court, Professor, also how many of them are repentant or seeking leniency. And at that moment, they regret what happened. Some have continued to regret what happened, or so they've expressed in the last day. Others have become very, very vindicated in their minds to the point where they want not only to get pardons and clemency like we've seen here, but they think, and this is very common in right-wing media right now, that they should be able to get reparations and prosecute the prosecutors or even the judges who carried out this massive investigation over the past 4 years.
Wow. What else did you hear from Nishe?
Well, one of the things that's also common in right-wing media that he repeated, and I think common from Trump himself, is he's saying, this is a witch hunt. And that's the president's term for a lot of the prosecutions of him, which have also now gone by the wayside. And that this was the attempt by Democrats, people like the leadership in Chicago and blue cities and blue states, to go after their opponents while supposedly they're ignoring, the rioters, and that us in the media focused on them too, by the way, in their opinion, and not focused on the rioters. I covered the George Floyd riots too at some considerable threat to my safety on May 30th, 2020 now, was it?
Yeah, over 4 years ago.
Yeah, almost 4 years ago. And, I can tell you that we covered it, and there are people that have been prosecuted for looting. I don't think they're conflating looting an Apple store, which, all due respect to the business owners, of course, with trying to overthrow the government. I don't know how you do that.
So, Professor, according to CPOST surveys over the last 4 years, around 10% of Americans, which is still millions of people, they see those who stormed that Capitol as patriots, and they actually support violence as a solution for political grievances from both the left and the right. How concerning is this?
This is very concerning because we know that public support for political violence, it's not a direct cause of violence, but it's a powerful indirect cause of violence. The more the public supports political violence, the more volatile individuals will take violent action believing their actions will be popular and they will be rewarded for it in the public. You saw this with the murder of the CEO, the healthcare CEO.
Right.
You see this with the Pelosi attacker. They want media attention because they believe their actions will be popular. Well, now what you're seeing is about 20% of those convicted of January 6 offenses have sought media attention to call attention to this and actually make money and actually have people donate to them on websites. About 80% decide they want to stay under the radar. What you are seeing is that the more there's popular support for political violence, in this case, 10% of the American public is 30 million adults.
Yeah,
that's a large number.
But to your
This will
point,
encourage this group to become more violent.
I'm also thinking about the multiple attempts to assassinate President Trump during the 2024 campaign season, right? So is political violence just becoming normalized in this country?
Exactly, Sasha. So people on the right might say, remember famously Donald Trump said he didn't need the magnetometers on January 6th because they're not coming to hurt him?
Yeah.
This is a mistake. Even Donald Trump needs to see the more he normalizes political violence, even for his own causes, the more he is encouraging violence and political violence in general. And this is why our country is becoming so politically violent. And we need to recognize and pull back from this.
Scary times. We got to leave it there. We've been talking with the director of Chicago's Chicago Project on Security and Threats, Professor Robert Pape, and WBEZ's Dan Mihalopoulos. Thank you both so much.